Welcome to the final video in our GBL mini course. Thanks for sticking the course. If you've done them all, we really appreciate it. This final topic is facilitating game-based learning effectively. If you work in the software tools industry, which I work in, we have an expression which we don't share very often, but it's a fool with a tool is still a fool. And it mightn't be politically correct, but basically, if you just put a game into a room, no matter how good that game is, and you don't have good facilitation, then people aren't going to get very much from it. So a fool with a game is still a fool. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about some tips on how to facilitate game-based learning. And I'm also going to do a quick recap of the whole course, just to show you what we've actually covered together. So how do you facilitate great game-based learning? Well, the first thing is you need to decide your role. And one way to do this is to look at the 4 T's we covered earlier: topic, technique, team, and touch, and agree each of these. Are you going to ignore them? Are you going to observe them passively? Are you going to coach them proactively? And this is something the facilitators need to sit down and agree in advance with whoever's sponsoring the game-based learning. So you might decide, for example, you're going to ignore touch, so you don't have time to look at people's individual style. You're going to coach team, and you're going to observe how people perform in topic and techniques. And that doesn't mean you're totally passive. What it means more is at the end of each round, you give your observations and the team work with them. Whereas if you were coaching, you might actually intervene during a round with a team. So the first thing is decide effectively the contract you have with the learners as a facilitator. There's 3 things you need to watch out for on game-based learning when you do it in teams. And they're quite obvious. The first one is the self-appointed leaders. These are people who take over the games and become the leaders by self-appointment. Now, often the team will sort this out themselves. That's usually the best way. But if a team are not sorting this out, then you need to decide whether to point it out or actually to intervene, or you could also move people between teams. A second one is a slow engager. Some people haven't really got started before the game's over. And these are the people who sit with their arms folded and say, I knew that wouldn't work. Team often sorts that out as well, or they sort themselves out. And the other thing you need to watch for is potentially if a person who is disengaged, and sneaking a look at their mobile phone, or they're distracted, there's something going on back at base. So you need to just watch the team dynamics. Now, because it's game-based learning, people do get amazingly engaged. So I've rarely seen anybody disengaged or distracted. But it does sometimes happen. They might have something going on that's really important and they keep nipping out. And that's one of the things you need to watch for. So be an active coach, watching out for these 3 dynamics that can be sorted by the team or may not get sorted by the team. The other thing you've got to do as a facilitator is just generally encourage teamwork. Try to make sure everybody's engaged and looking out for and watching for is evidence-based decision making happening, or decisions being made on hunches or assumptions. That's one of the traits of a high-performing team. They look at the evidence, and the evidence drives their decision making. Then the other thing you should do is steering the team conversations to maximum value and learning objectives. Let me give an extreme example. Somebody's looking at the screen of the simulation and saying, I don't like the color of that. That would be better if it said this. Is there not a bit more data we could have here? These are really low value conversations. How do we win the game? That's also a low value conversation. A high value conversation is when anything arises in the game, what would you do in the real world? So not what would you do to be well positioned in this game, but what would you do in the real world? So that's an important facilitation role, steering the conversation to high value conversations and away from low value conversations. The other thing the facilitator can do is have on one page the key learning objectives and look for almost a checklist. This is an opportunity at this point in time there's something being done in the area of decision making. So the learning objectives will generally all get ticked, but each team will be addressing them in different orders, and a good facilitator can cover the learning objectives in the order they arise as problems in the teams. The other key facilitator role is the end of each round then, the debrief, making sure the debrief is insightful, it happens, also sharing observations about the team, not maybe being too directive, but giving the team something to think about for the next round. That's a vital role. And also when they're having their debriefs, making sure that everybody is participating in the debrief. The other great role of the facilitator, which often sadly doesn't happen, is after a game-based learning event, everybody goes away on a high and sometimes nothing else happens. That's the end of the learning. So one of the challenges for a facilitator is to keep game-based learning, keep the learning alive after an event. And one great way to do this is to form a learning community and set up calls that happen afterwards and give people work and check-ins. And we have a little a little tool, a little app called Sensei that's been designed to keep learning alive after a conversation. But there's after a learning experience. There's lots of ways to do this, but the main point is taking the event and trying to turn it into some kind of community, and that needs to be facilitated because communities don't run themselves. So those are the key things that are needed from a facilitator to facilitate great game-based learning. Other things just to think about are make it fun. There's a great book I would recommend, A Theory of Fun for Game Design by Ralph Koster. Ralph was Chief Creative Officer at Sony. So you need to make it fun as well. People learn best when they're having fun. I also try and introduce a little bit of theatre whenever I can, a little bit of suspense, make the game-based learning memorable. So that's the course really over. What I'm going to do now is just a very short recap on what we've covered together. First of all, the justification for game-based learning. We've seen there is quite good evidence for it. We have also seen that thought leaders such as Gartner are strongly recommending it. The other thing, the research from Jessica Tribus really shows that game-based learning combines all the best parts of passive learning and active learning, and you don't lose anything. So game-based learning is not a big risk. You don't have to do a custom serious game with a Star Wars type budget. You can do something low key, or you can start with something just off the shelf. So there's good justification for game-based learning. I've introduced 3 different lenses you can look at for game-based learning to avoid the temptation of becoming dazzled by the technology and the what can the technology do school of game-based learning, which really doesn't lead to great business results. We've looked at the game-based learning process. L in game-based learning, you need a learning process. If there's no process, there will be little learning. And we've introduced a process we find very useful that I call the I, we, I sandwich to make sure that the learning is personalized and committed at the end. We've talked about evaluating game-based learning technologies and, more importantly, not looking at game-based learning technologies until you really understand your audience and the learning objectives and what you're really looking for. We've showed you how to classify the different forms of game-based learning. We've looked at the old problem of the GBL business case. Either you decided you want to do this and you need to get funding for it, or else you really want to work out, does this actually make sense financially? And I've shared with you some tips on how you might do that. We've also shared insights from GBL participants from 10 years of running games. We've introduced the idea of the effective evolution of teamwork, and we've also introduced 7 mistakes which teams always seem to make under pressure. And finally, we've talked about facilitating game-based learning effectively. In a sense, game-based learning is only as good as the facilitators who run it. People do not get game-changing experiences sitting at a computer screen. They gain those from talking to their fellow participants and talking to really good facilitators who bring things out that maybe they haven't seen. So thank you for sticking with us. The book covers most of this material. You can get it on Amazon. If you visit our website on www.dashboardsimulations.com, we'll gladly send you a free executive summary. Dashboard Simulations has a complete range of team-based simulation games. Our mission statement in one line is to help companies get 50% more from their leadership talent. We've games that take whole days, our masterclass collection, high-performing teams, team scheduling, change management, business acumen, and we've games that we can play in an hour in our strategy, our interplay collection, and we've lots of other stuff to support the learning process as well.